Yes. And so, welcome everyone. And we have some new guests here. At this point, I'm just saying hello. And I'd like to actually dive in quite quickly. The way today's session works, I see you, I love compassion in times of crisis, is that I actually like to start with an exercise today where we go into breakouts and have a dialogue session. Some of you who are familiar with the ULab theory of Otto Scharmer, this is not too new. For those of you who have never done this, this may be something new, because actually I like to practice or exercise what this term "I see you" means. So, and there are various meanings, and as some of you know, the movie Avatar, it's not new to you at all. It's you're very familiar with you, and we'd like to start this as a trigger in a conversation about love and compassion in times of crisis. So if that's okay with you, we just dive right in.
Great.
Oops, 1 sec. My computer is, where's my mouse? All right.
How many people are we?
6 at this point.
Okay.
So talking, and if you, because I haven't done so, if you can mute yourself for the time being, that would be wonderful. Talking about crisis, I mean, in the description I said, like, well, of course, we're talking about a global crisis, but the pandemic and Corona is also a human crisis, and therefore it's an individual crisis. It affects us all, one way or the other. So as we will go into some breakouts fairly soon, maybe you can already think of how has the Corona crisis affected you personally. Now, this could be negative, this could be indifferent, could be neutral, or could be actually be positive. But think about it, for a minute, what you like to pick. It could be anything. It doesn't really matter what you pick, as long as you pick one experience. And in the exercise we'll be doing in a few minutes, we're talking about the power of dialogue. Because when we say "I see you," it's the trigger, it's the beginning or a potential beginning of a dialogue. And the dialogue can make all the difference. And a dialogue is not just a conversation. And a couple of years ago, when it was the first time I attended the ULab of theory, Otto Scharmer's Presencing Institute at MIT, he introduced the Iceberg model of communication. And this Iceberg model of communication is like, when you talk to someone, it's not just like the very first level you want to have a dialogue with. Let's say you hear the words, but you want to dive a little deeper. And what he says, like, well, when you see another person, it's like you see the behavior, but it's like maybe you hear the words, and when you hear the words, it's like, okay, that's fine. You know the facts and what have you, but it's not really what's the real meaning is. As you get deeper, you understand that the other person has certain thoughts, certain belief system that shape that person's behavior and communication style. And then way below, it's the source. The source is like, what is the real essence of that being I'm talking with? And he compares this, or he makes the bridge to the levels of listening. And he says the first level of listening is downloading. That is like, when we talk to someone, I have my opinion. I just want to basically reconfirm my opinions and judgments, and I'm not really paying attention. A second level is that, well, I realize that the other person is sharing information, and there is some data that comes to me. And if it's new data, I recognize it's new data. I may not have to agree with it, but I understand that there is a certain form of data, so certain form of information. But this is called factual listening. Then there's empathic listening. That is, where we build an emotional connection with the other person. That is, we see the other person through his or her eyes, and we feel with the other person. That's a very deep level. And people say when you really listen, they're talking about the empathic listening. But actually there's a fourth level. And this is very interesting. This is actually an opening level, the generative listening level. It is that you connect to the other person to a new emerging state, that you you really try to connect to the other person, not just from the emotional side, but you on a deeper level. The way you do is, you can do it as the following. Sometimes when we're in a conversation, say person A shares some information, and usually person B likes to dive in and say something. Okay, yeah, fine. I have something to say. I want to react. When you practice generative listening, you're not doing this. You're just letting the words sink in. And then maybe afterwards, after your brief pause of silence, you can continue, or maybe the other person can still continue with his or her thoughts. And this silence or this waiting actually opens a true dialogue, because you give the other person the space either to add information or B, to listen and to comprehend what I've just said. And what you do is, like, as you do this, you're not just opening, you say, your mind, you open your whole being as you listen to the other person. You have an open mind, you have an open heart, and you just like listen with all of your senses without feeling or following the urge, having to react to the other person's words right away. I hope this doesn't sound too abstract. It's not too abstract, because we'll be practicing this in a minute. And let me stop this so I can see you again, because I need to have the control. And let's see this. First of all, are there any questions about the rather abstract explanation of these levels of listening? Because if so, then please ask your questions now.
At the generative level,
yeah.
How do you manage to distinguish between the fact that you're listening and the fact that your mind is someplace else? The silence can mean a lot of things.
Well, when you're sincerely interested in what the other person is saying, and you are listening with all of your senses, the other person will notice this. I mean, of course, if your mind is somewhere else, then you're not listening in the first place. Even then, it's completely different. But you just have to practice. Let's put it this way. I mean, as you enter a conversation, I mean, I assume that you do have an interest in the other person's being and what he or she has to say. So if that's not the case, the other person will quickly realize that you are not paying attention, that you're not present. But being present is something completely different, and actually open spaces. Okay, and the exercise we are doing is the following. We have a total of 7 people, and we'll have therefore also 3 breakouts, and the breakouts, they're actually 7th person just join us. So we'll have 4 breakouts, 2 people in each session, and you have about 3 minutes, or say 3 to 4 minutes. The first minute, one person shares his or her experience of the Corona crisis, whether it was positive or negative or neutral. You can share anything. The other person is listening, and please listen, not just carefully. Don't just go to the empathic listening level. Go to the generative listening level. That means open your heart, open your mind, open all your senses, and really listen to what the other person is saying without interrupting the other person. Okay, without interrupting the other person at all. 1 minute can be long, can be short, and it's up to you actually for the timekeeping. Then, after a brief moment of silence, you switch roles. Okay. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, well, we have one additional person. Was everyone in a breakout? I guess so, yes. So how did it go? First of all, I think the breakout technically it did work out for you.
Yep.
Great. I admit this has been the very first time I did a dialogue exercise with Zoom, and it's not the same exercise when you do this offline, face to face. But I'm still interested in what have you experienced, and as you try to enter, say, a generative level of listening?
Well, I can only say it was an attempt. It was very brief, and had I not had the connection to Jay from last week, I think I would have found it very difficult to immediately dip into that regenerative listening. And because I had the connection to Jay, because I found him so compelling and so wonderful last week, I felt it was easy for me to let myself go, and it was a very soothing experience, although it was very short.
And I would add to that and agree with all that, that it was short, and because we had, I found because I had a little common connection from last week, that I could build and shortcut some of the conversation by referencing some of that to get my expression across with less, with the little bit of time we had. So without some prior connection and that little bit of time, it would have felt, I think, very artificial. But still, I mean, an exercise. I think even as an artificial, it's, you know, lifting weights feels artificial to me too. So it doesn't mean I shouldn't do it.
For us, I think the shortness of the conversation allowed the level of listening where you're really trying to stand in the other person's shoes, as we say, in finding Stabensagen. A little bit of, you know, hearing what the other person is talking about and trying to imagine and being in that situation, but difficult in a 1 minute conversation to really get beyond that. But still a good opportunity to try to forge a connection.
Anyone else?
Yeah, because I've been through the worst nightmare of my whole life just before the Corona crisis started, but been working through it, and it's kind of a paradox that when this happened, I now am having the best time of my life, being able to think, to read, to contemplate, meeting many interesting people, creating great projects, you know, this I see you come, you know, it comes from Ubuntu, and when I started looking really into it, it was Peter Senge, but now this video with everyday life with Coldplay, you know, you can hear them talk Ubuntu, and he says, I am because we are. So, you know, you cannot be a human being unless you are with other people being human beings. And this I see you in Ubuntu, it's like really, I bring you into existence. And like bringing someone else to existence also means a lot to the person who is doing that, because it's like mutually empower and unfold each other in like this intersubjectivity, you know, like seeing that other person for who that person are without any ego connected to it. So that level of listening is what I connect to. I see you.
When I consciously decide to enter, let's say, a level of generative listening, to me it actually is as if things slow down. I don't feel pressured to react right away, and by not doing so, actually, it seems to me that there is a new space being created, and it's much easier. Actually, it becomes easier to listen to the other person and to understand what the other person is trying to say. That's my experience, you know. Yes, Brian, we'll talk about Ubuntu in a second. Actually, before we do so, there is an extra slide talking about I see you, and I also like to share this one very brief video clip from Avatar, about 6-7 seconds long. Let me switch back to my screen, and let's see how this works. The last week when we talked about identity, authenticity, and we talked about either Ubuntu or we talked about I see you, we actually also refer to avatar. And I started with, first I thought, okay, well, let's call this session avatar I see you or something. And this something didn't right click, but still the message I see you is very strong. And the movie, it's much more than saying hello. It is like when I see you means when you see me, you can bring me into existence. It is more, it's like, it means I see the love and your feelings and your soul and you mean everything to me. I acknowledge and I respect the other person's presence before that person even has said a single word. Maybe I say, instead of saying hello, I'm saying, I see you. And for those of you who do not know the movie Avatar, let me see if let me switch to YouTube and see how this works. You can see the big screen?
Yeah.
This is it.
I think you have to select your,
So
to hear your computer audio.
Okay.
We can see, but we can't hear.
You cannot hear. Okay, then that's not.
In Zoom, when you share screen, there's a small button at the bottom you can click to share
fine.
computer audio.
Hold on one sec. Okay.
A very small
Okay.
button.
Well, there are quite a few buttons. Okay, anyway, let's say this way it didn't quite stop, but you saw some of the video, and the message is like, it's not that they just say it. The way they phrase it, at least to me, it's, you know, that's how I perceive it. It's more like really seeing the whole presence of the other person, and this can make all make a big difference. So it's much more than saying hello, because when I say hello to the other person, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm here, you're there, but I don't really acknowledge the other person necessarily. So with the word I see you, it goes deeper, and there's more of a connect. And we can say this is important in any situation, but I think it's important, especially in times of, you know, this pandemic, where we have become more sensitive to, say, how other people feeling, how I am feeling. Regarding the Ubuntu, and maybe Christopher, since you have also read a lot about Ubuntu, and Brian, you asked a question. It's from it comes from Africa, and also basically it means that well, I'm here because you are here. It's not just like about me, it's about us. It's I can only exist, I can only be a human being because there are other human beings. And it is the respect, the recognition, and the revelation of the giftedness to the human spirit. So it's like, it's embracing community. And this is what Ubuntu means. Christopher, maybe you can add a little bit.
I mean, it's really a tribal thinking that if we don't think of how we as a tribe can survive, we will not survive. And that is this collective way of thinking, I am because we are, is implemented in the Ubuntu way of being with each other. Whoever you are, everyone is a friend. And it doesn't matter where you come from, which country, since you are just another human being, we are. And that, the way that they see it is like with no ego. It's like I bring you into existence. And that is a conscious decision behind it. And that brings up this mutuality in empowering each other and unfolding each other. And when you put your mind to that, something happens with the relationship.
Brian, does this make sense to you? Because you asked the question about Ubuntu. To me, Ubuntu, or you know, the saying I see you, it is really like an opening process. It's up to us what we'll make out of it. It is a true opening, or it's an opening of a true dialogue. It's not a conversation, it's deeper. And to have a true or generative dialogue, and Donna, you ask what's the difference between empathic listening and generative listening. The generative listening takes place when you give space for new things to emerge. So, for example, say there are two people and they're having a hard time, they have a problem, and they're looking for a new answer. And so one person says something, the other person says something, and then there is silence. And it is in this silence that sometimes new ideas can pop up. This is like what Shama refers to as, listening to the emerging future. It is not that you don't have the intention, I have to come up with a solution. You just basically relax and let it allow it to emerge. And I don't think you can leapfrog this, because then it would be a conscious, too much of a pushing decision, a conscious decision. But I think if you want to lead from the emerging future, it is also you have to enter a space or create and enter a space for things to happen. Even though, and especially in a situation where you do not have an answer to some questions, but you have to allow this to emerge. Does this make sense?
Well, I think it's in how you experience it. I mean, as an empath, you're taking information in on every level. You're not just listening to what people are saying mentally, psychologically. You're listening to every single level. And that's unavoidable. You can't, it's not a switch. There's no switch on that. So for me, generative is about the same, only because when you're in the space, you're holding the space. That's the experience of it. You're holding the space for whatever needs to show up. It's sort of like difference between incoming and what's potentially coming up, I guess. So I think I understand it academically, but experientially it works differently for me. Maybe I'm just weird, and but that's just how it feels. So.
Well,
Yeah.
understand is one thing. To me, it happens sometimes when you're in a team, and there's like this, how should I say, kind of like team spirit, magic, what have you. And out of nothing, you can say new ideas pop up, which nobody has thought of before. And this can only, I think this can only happen if there is something like, this, you call it space. And I believe that this form of listening, acknowledging the other persons and being present with all your senses, with an open heart, with an open mind, definitely facilitates this to take place.
I have a question. I'm not sure whether the term listening is actually adequate, because what we're saying is, I mean, we're creating, just by virtue of presence and consciousness, a realm in which something can emerge. And that's not my definition of listening. I mean, the empathic listening is like, I'm putting myself into, say, Donna's shoes, and trying to listen to what she's saying from her perspective. But the generative listening, to me, as I've understood it now, is way beyond opening ears and trying to take something in. It's consciously creating the void so that something can emerge. Does that make sense?
Yep. What do you call it? Void? I call it space. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I like the distinction as well. I do believe, Christian, as you mentioned, that I can be an empathetic. I can be resonating with the experience of the other person, but I've experienced being in that state, but I'm also not trusting and not open. So in the sense that I'm trying to control, or I think particularly I have a side of me that can be like the codependent, right? So I'm empathetic listening, but then I want to fix. So my mind is also working in an evaluative way, which is kind of which is a type of listening that I spend too much time in. As an occupational hazard, I think, for a consultant and an entrepreneur, always trying to find the problem, So if I'm empathetic and I'm in a trusting state of which I believe that the future is going to emerge, not because of me, but because of something else that happens in the universe, which I'm just flowing with. I found that a very distinct difference. And there's certain moments when I'm facilitating, only a particular moments when I'm facilitating it. And Thomas, you mentioned this, when I'm in this habit of being able to create that space, and they are some of the most thrilling moments for me. But now as we think of it today, I believe they're thrilling because they're also unusual for me, because I'm usually just trying to fix things and control things and not leave that openness.
You said, we have a tendency to fix things. You just like, the word fix, and that triggered something in me. It's because like right now when a crisis, some people say, oh, all these politicians, they have to fix things, it's war and stuff, they have to come up with solutions and what have you. I'm not convinced, first of all, that you can fix this crisis, because there's no quick fix. Instead, I think it's more important, as we have all experienced the community or a new sense of community, to maybe acknowledge and respect this community, and maybe just sometimes holding still and see what wants to emerge. Because I believe that some of the fixes or solutions that really will make a difference, we haven't even thought of, because they have not emerged yet. But for these solutions to emerge, we just have to, I don't want to say let go as being passive, but really say acknowledging some of the good things that have already evolved as a consequence of the crisis. And the sense of community overall, in most cases, is such an example. So I think that then we just have to hold still, rather than just like being very hectic and returning to the old normal, which is gone. How this can be done politically, for example, I don't know, but I believe that on the individual level, I think it's much easier, on the private level, because the political level, we don't have, this is up to them, you can say, but what about us? So the other, over the last couple of weeks, we came up, we talked about, some crisis, about problems, etc. And then we think, okay, there needs to be a resolution right away. But when you cannot act, when you cannot react, the only thing you can do is like calm down and wait for the best to happen. All of a sudden, sometimes things start to evolve, but only if we allow them to. And I think this is like this generative moment of void or space, what have you. And interacting with other people, we can practice the very same thing and see what happens. I have no idea what will come out of it, but I believe that something cool, something positive can come out of it.
Yes, so what belief do we know? What's going to come out of this? And the thing is, we don't know. And to have resilience and the trust to whatever wants to emerge is something that we have to co-create with this capacity to listen that we were just talking about, or else it won't happen, or else we will always stay in there in the old sense of self, which is old knowledge. It's the past. And so to have the courage and be brave enough to just totally open up for whatever wants to emerge and manifest itself will happen if we put our hearts and minds to it.
And I think, sorry, Christopher.
I just find that so exciting and thrilled.
Well, it is, and we're not dependent on or in need to wait for any political decision. I think if we, just look at us seven, if we manage to hold the space open for the new to emerge, and if there's only enough, any totalitarian movement recurring movement, striving for the old patterns, is just bound to fail. We just need to unite in this, spirit of I am because you are, and not because I want to impose myself on anything. It's just because this entire point in history is just calling for the new, and the new, it never comes from a plan. It just comes, and just to let it come, from a deep space of consciousness, and the void or the space, whichever way you want to call it. That's what we need to also like forge from our bodies, not only from our brains. We just need to be present as whole human beings for this thing to be made possible. And that's, to me, that's the greatest force on earth.
Yep.
It's consciousness. And
whatever consciousness is, there's no, it really doesn't rid it.
Oh, well, it's the abstraction from ego. It's also the embracing of ego. We'll never be without it. And it's the balancing between all the polarities that are in the world, and the conscious dealing with the polarity. I think that's the higher place of consciousness. I am because you are. I mean, that's the ultimate polarity, I guess.
Yeah.
This conversation reminds me, is really putting some things together, that in our breakout session, Christian, you mentioned so I heard some things about sort of the and others have mentioned sort of the creativity. I've noticed a lot of creativity coming out in the COVID space with the musicians, performing from home, and conversations like this, and even in my I feel a lot bursting forward with me. And when I was teaching entrepreneurship, I was looking at creativity models, and sort of like some of the stages or processes we typically go through in the creative. And it's actually similar to what we're describing here. When one of the stages is often missed, and that's we tend to do data gathering, we tend to do analysis kinds of thinking, and then we want to move into often directly into solution. And but actually, what the creativity models show is that they recommend don't do that, right? And actually, there's this space between we would talk about the divergent and the convergent thinking. So they say go take a walk. This is why sometimes I had an idea for and I in the shower the other day for this thing, and I immediately got out and I filed for the URL on it. It was like in a space on a bike ride, or you mentioned your bike ride last week, Thomas, or in a walk, and one of the things maybe that's occurring is in this COVID forced space, we've had sort of a collective opportunity that normally we don't get, right? Because we're moving from data gathering, analysis, solution kind of cycle all the time without the creative space, the generative moment, the walk, the open space. And if I have, I guess, some excitement or hope about this time, maybe there'll be a collective or burst of creativity that comes out of this open space of COVID. That's like the generative thinking, generative listening we're talking about.
Do we allow this open space, this open COVID space you called it? Or is it just like, I mean, it's like, in Europe, it's like, the economy, everything is opening up again. I mean, so it's like two to 3 weeks ahead of the US and then Canada. And I sense that people are becoming hectic again. They're almost like returning to the old pace, which is, I don't know, I'm not too happy about this in the sense that say, well, what have you learned? So the question is like, well, A, how can we create this space, and how can we hold this space? Because I believe that we need to hold it much longer for new solutions to emerge, for new ideas to emerge. It's too early to just return to the old normal.
I have a different experience here in Europe, Thomas. It's amazing. I think that we have the group of people who wants to go back to the old normal, who now made a very different experience from one extreme to the other. And I hope they will not fall back completely to the other side. But on the other side, I really had a lot of conversations with people saying, what I experience now, when things are going slowly, even when I go to the forest or to the wood or have a talk or have a walk, it is so different. It is so different to experience myself and others as a human being. I want to keep that. So a lot of people really, I talked about, say, there is something going on that really is a different quality. And I mean, my hope is that really a lot of people will take that when we are going back. I mean, that would something be what I will try to support. Also, just giving the people a simple exercise, reflect your home office experience, even when you stayed in business.
I totally agree with you, and I hope that lots and lots of people will, have the very same opinion, the same attitude, that they say, no, we have experienced we have actually experienced the quality of life very differently. I like to keep it and bring it into to new world, whereas some of there are quite a few. There's a fraction of the population of business. They just want to go back to normal. And I do see this as a risk, and it's up to us to secure a majority of those people who do know something about the quality of life. The question is like, how can we hold this space? What other activities do you think of that will help us holding the space?
I just want to concur with what Brian has just written into the chat. We will never return back to normal. Obviously, a couple of, old world elites are trying to claw back to their particular advantage that they derived out of the old system. But opening up now means just deepening everything. And I'm not talking about a health issue. I'm talking about the pure financial issue. Just global capitalism is just gone. I mean, you look at the billions, trillions that are being pumped into the world economy. Where does the money come from? It doesn't come from anywhere. It doesn't come from anywhere. It's just going to implode big time. And the more, the old world is trying to claw back, the worse the crisis is going to be, and the more substantial and sustainable the transformation of the world is going to be. So in a very crude way, I'm welcoming this panic, as in, let's try to save the economy, because it's just going to make matters even worse or better.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. But do you think this people will realize? I mean, this is like this is going to be the outcome, or again, is there anything that we can do or should do to hold this space longer, to help, let's say, some skeptics to come to a higher level of consciousness?
Well, it's like Merkel said that Angst is eine schlechte Ratgeber, which means that anxiety is a bad advice. A lot of anxiety out there. So what is it that we can offer? A new perspective with a new hope, where we start functioning as human beings in the sense of I am, we are. Because I feel that up to now we have lived in a world based on ego needs and basically unmet ego needs. And what we're experiencing now is an evolutionary transformation to a high level of consciousness, away from the ego to the eco. So that is, in my opinion, that is the new paradigm shift, the next step of human evolution. to the collective intelligence. I feel strongly that is what is happening, and it will take some time, but someone has to start, and why couldn't that be us? You know, like just connecting those kind of thoughts and create those ripple effects. That is important.
I think, Manfred, you said it like that. You would like to see people being asked how they, when they return to work, that they are being asked to how they experience this time of crisis. I think this is very powerful, and you know, it's very simple and can be very effective. And what this crisis has actually also taught me, besides, you know, that things are a little bit slower, which I truly appreciate. Making sure that there is enough time for this space to unfold. You know, it's like, it's you know, people, that's a good thing. They realize like, well, we cannot work 8 hours a day. I mean, some people, they complain, well, when they have home office, they can only work 4 hours a day, as if they would work less than when they were in the office. You know, I mean, it's like when they work 4 hours in the home office, that's pretty darn effective, you know, very productive. When they're in office, you know, in a regular office, I doubted that they work more than 4 hours productive time. So, I mean, this will definitely change some, you know, the way we work. But if that's the case, like, why don't we just like cut the time in the office and spend more time living?
Well, we have been talking about new work models over the past 10 or 12 years. Mm-hmm. And even you can go back to Greece, yeah, we had 46 working hours a day and not more. But it was so difficult to bring out organizations out of their old patterns. And now this crisis showed us within a few days, there is so much possible what we were never thinking about. So something is now going on in the brain of the people, I'm very sure, that they really, a part of them will rethink, why can it be different, as some of the organizations already did. Because I have a lot of clients recognizing that they had no problem to get into a different mode. They did that very consciously. But I think that Donna wrote a very important word in that's anxiety. The key for me would still be how aware is everyone about itself and herself, about the emotions they have. I think that's the key. And a lot of people stay in the anxiety mode. I have to do that, I have to do that, I have to do that. Otherwise, it won't go wrong, or I will have existence problems and things like that. If we cannot support and if we cannot give hope to these people and show them how to come out of that state of, call it crisis mode or protection mode, into a co-creating mode, then it won't work. But I think there are a lot of things going on that might be possible. And this is what I think all the people should support. They are aware about that. Call it however you want.
Yeah, I agree. Thomas, I think you actually gave us something very practical I'm taking away that I can do. And it's this type of listening. So if I'm asking people what their experience was or is, say we talk about their home office experience we just mentioned, or any other aspect of what's gone on or going on during this crisis, and I'm listening for, and maybe this isn't exactly what that kind of generative listening is, but what I want to be an advocate for, or I want to notice, or I want to stand for, is as people are sharing that, bringing forth or highlighting or reflecting the generative experiences they actually had. Because people can share a lot of aspects of their experience, and that's all great in an empathetic listening, but there's also then the possibility of what what generative experience they were actually having as well, and that we're all having, and you know, maybe we can each sort of stand for that space. We can hold and reinforce that space in a very practical way, you know, that highlights it, and to help bring that sort of mental muscle online of being open to the possibilities, you know, the full human future.
Okay, Brian.
Brian, you're talking to yourself.
No, we still cannot hear you. So maybe disconnect.
So I'll speak to that while Brian's getting his self unmuted there. I mean, one of the things I've learned in the journey is that there's spaces in time where you walk into, and there's two parts to it, but the first part is you walk into a void. You have, the past is gone. That's pretty clear. The future's not yet clear. And there's this dark space that you stand in, and you kind of want to force it into some kind of certainty, clarity, something that you can put your, you know, that's tangible, that you can grab a hold of. And the learning I had out of that is that you can't do that. I mean, you can try, but it rarely works. So it's just that space where you've got to, you know, observe. And it's about that awareness that Manfred mentioned too. It's about being absolutely observant and aware of what's showing up. But it's just that space where you're in this dark void, and and it's not full of dark thoughts at all. It's just full of no thought. It's just, there's just nothing to work off of. And so you just hold, you know, you have to be there and be okay with that. And eventually it clears up. Yeah, exactly. That pretty much is how it works. And that's the part where, and the second part is that in this COVID emergence, there's a temptation for people to roll back to what they're familiar with, because they're not aware they can actually take the initiative. A lot of people live life very passively. They wait for the government to tell them what to do, or the church, or somebody else. But it's that reigniting of the personal spirit, of the capacity to take the initiative and co-create something. And I think that's the other thing we're holding the space for, is the creative space to step in and do something collectively that we would never do alone, because it's too big and too much.
I think that the crisis has actually allowed us to see other people, other things, other phenomena, other, you know, see the world as it is. I mean, become more aware of nature, become more aware of some silly practices of the past. So maybe we can say now to the world, I can see you, much more than we have done in the past. So from this perspective, the crisis was wonderful. It has been a wonderful chance, or it still is a chance. It's up to us what we'll make out of it. And the question, of course, like, so what has love got to do with this? I think it's love is life. I mean, it's love it's very personal. We can say, I can see you, but I also have to include myself. So for example, I can be compassionate with somebody else, but unless I can practice self-compassion, my other compassion is maybe just fake, or maybe it's only temporary. For example, when we're sitting on an airplane, and all of a sudden, you know, the oxygen mask comes down because there is a loss of pressure, and we have kids traveling with us. It's wonderful that we're compassionate, that we want to help the kids with a mask. But if we first don't help ourselves, we die, they die. Okay. So first we have to actually, I mean, love, you know, I mean, it's great to love other people, but actually also we have to find what I call self-love, which is not egotism. It's nothing, it's just the opposite. It's acknowledging who we are. And when the other person says, I see you, this is definitely, it's a boost. It can help big time. So I believe it's not linear, it's kind of like circular. When I'm talking to another person and I say, I see you, I give the other person the chance to acknowledge his or her own presence as well. and the other way around too. So this is the thing, this is where love and compassion comes in.
I think love and compassion also comes in acceptance. I mean, I woke up this morning realizing that a whole lot of places where you are who you are, it's not accepted. There's this pushback on, you know, you need to be this, or you need to be that, or you need to be a bunch of things. But love is just unconditional acceptance, and that's a beautiful form of love.
Yeah. You know, it will be interesting to see if any of this conversation and some of the insights we share today is actually also being taught at business schools, how the younger generation thinks of it. And looking at already to next week, I'd like to continue that conversation, this direction, where we'll have Julia Christensen from, she's a dean at a business school in Canada, join us. And I'm curious, like, how she's been teaching these insights to her students, or if the younger generation has been experiencing the same thing what we have shared today. So this is going to be next week's topic. And also in closing, I would like to say that actually next week, I should like to start 30 minutes later because there's another meeting I've been asked to attend. So if this is okay, we would start at 10 a.m. Eastern. And this way also on the West Coast, you can sleep 30 minutes longer. And in Germany, we would start at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And if that's okay, but I will update the Eventbrite and LinkedIn, what have you. I do not know exactly the title, but it's going to be something like Reshaping the Future at Business Schools or something like this. And it's Julia Christensen. She was with us 2 or 3 weeks ago when Donna was your session, and she couldn't make it the last couple of times, but we'll see what she will tell us about her experience at the business school and what she thinks about education and how we can carry the flame to the next generation and actually build, a sustainable future. Okay. So again, thank you so much again for being part of this dialogue. I apologize for some of the technical hiccups at the beginning, but this is the best way to learn it. Some of you have never experienced the breakouts. Now it was the first time. Anyway, I hope you have all a great week. Stay healthy, stay well, and see you all hopefully next week.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thomas.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you all.
Thomas, just hold on. Jay and